On today's episode of Uncommon Sense, Lee and I asked the question, do we need another Rerum novarum? Stay tuned. Hello, viewers and listeners. Welcome back to another episode of Uncommon Sense. I'm Joe Grabowski, the VP for Evangelization here at the Chesterton Society, joined by our Chief Operations Officer, Lee Sondano. Hi, Lee.
Good afternoon, Joe. How are you?
Very well, thank you. And for all of you viewers and listeners, hopefully you've been following along with the conversation so far. I'm going to turn this over to Lee to do a little recap of that. But if you're not subscribed to our YouTube channel, you should do that. Hit the bell to get notifications, leave comments, leave feedback, like the videos, all those things. Tell YouTube that you're interested in this content when it comes out. And you can do similar things on your podcasting app. You could make sure that you're subscribed to our channel. You can leave us reviews, things like that, just so that you're sure you're not missing any of these great conversations. We do have quite a few episodes here back on the playlist that you can check out on some of these topics, but now we're kind of turning and talking about the future rather than the past. And for that, like I said, I'm going to turn it over to Lee.
So this is a very exciting episode and kind of culmination of what you and I, like you said, have been talking about for the last couple of podcast episodes. So to bring people up to speed, if they haven't listened to the couple of podcasts that we've done, please go and listen to those. But basically, what we're talking about is how this all really started was the Holy Father picked the name of Pope Leo XIV for that significance of tying back to Pope Leo XIII. Joe and I were interested in exploring that a little bit and what that meant for us today, and looking at the history and the life of Pope Leo XIII, looking at his encyclical Rerum Novarum, which of course was his magnum opus. And kind of exploring Rerum Novarum line by line, which was really good as well. There was a lot going on back in the late 1890s. The Industrial Revolution had wreaked its, I guess, havoc, for better or for worse, on workers, and there were a lot of questions around the rights of workers, what it meant to be productive, what it means to have productive land. We're thinking about this in terms of machinery, in terms of industrial machinery that's causing this efficiency meter, right, to go up and continue to grow over the last 100+ years. And now I think, Joe, we're seeing ourselves in another sort of industrial revolution. I mean, if the key to the last industrial revolution was efficiency going up by introducing machinery, we're introducing a new type of machinery that really is starting to disrupt a large number of industries. So the question is because of artificial intelligence specifically, do we need another Rerum Novarum?
Yeah, and this is certainly where most speculators and spectators who are watching Pope Leo XIV and anticipating what, as we record this podcast, this is we're recording on Friday, July 11th, and Pope Leo is at Castel Gandolfo for the kind of traditional rest period of the summer that Italians, and particularly the popes, like to take. And during this time, it is said, or at least some have said, that he is writing his encyclical, his first encyclical. And that there is, of course, speculation that this might be what this is addressing, what this is about. Now, this would not be the first time that the Vatican has addressed artificial intelligence. We'll maybe mention that throughout the course of the episode. There was a document from the Dicastery of the Doctrine of the Faith and the Dicastery for Catholic Education that came out on this issue. But it does seem to be a concern for the pastoral leadership of the church. And so, and Pope Leo in particular, based on statements he has made and other people that know him and their speculations. So it's definitely something worth talking about. But I think, to get into that for our, since all we can do at this point is speculate, I thought we could maybe just do an overview of this topic and consider the justification, the rationale for why Part of that is what's kind of inscribed in that document that I mentioned from the two dicasteries in Rome. But part of it, I think, is just based on our Chestertonian knowledge of economics and distributism, and how a human-shaped, human-centered economy ought to be structured. And so, let's start though at the very beginning, Lee, if we can. And you have more of a background in tech than I have, and so let's take a stab at answering this first question: what are we even talking about? What is so-called artificial intelligence, and what is it not?
Yeah. So this is a very fun conversation, and you and I have had it a few times now, and I think we approach this a little differently. Of course, I have a background in IT. I've been working in information technology for Fortune 500 companies and for city governments for almost 20 years, and so I've seen the evolution even in my job and in the role of artificial intelligence and machine learning and automation over those years. And so it's an interesting thing to come into it now outside of the industry, seeing how it was disrupting inside the industry.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's interesting to hear how your take on this as well. I mentioned in our at our Chesterton Schools Network conference that we had a couple of weeks ago in New Orleans, we did a little panel of this as well, and I mentioned that artificial intelligence, the term, is nothing new. And I think that's surprising to a lot of people. I think they think that Chat GPT and everything else that's come out very recently is kind of the genesis of what we call artificial intelligence. But AI as a term has been around since the 1950s. I think it was actually in maybe the mid 50s. There was a gentleman named John McCarthy. He was a computer scientist. He coined the idea of artificial intelligence because he wrote a specific paper regarding whether or not computers can think. So that was the idea. And it's so funny because you think about that, Joe, is I think we're asking the same question today with Chat GPT and artificial intelligence and some of the learning language models and things like that. Is can these things really think, or are they just reacting? And I know we'll get to that in a second, but that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of the genesis of the term. What artificial intelligence is certainly a prescribed application of technology on certain variables. And I think that's something important to remember, is that even back in the 1950s and beyond, when they were teaching computers how to play chess and checkers, and they were starting to beat people, these were based on inputs from a human, right? And so that was something that was pretty well known as, yeah, a machine can learn what a human is telling it to learn, and it might be able to do it even faster. And that was sort of the key to this idea of artificial intelligence. It really was more machine learning and more automation. I think if you fast forward to today, those lines are being blurred a little bit because of machine learning, learning language models, and the operation of the computer to speak back to an input in common language. That's
Mm-hmm.
one of the things that I think has really changed is the common language factor in mentality. Is if this thing is talking back and it sounds familiar and it sounds human, then it must be human. And one of the quotes that I quoted back at the conference from the godfather of AI, who used to work for Google, and he said a couple of years ago that it isn't artificial intelligence that scares him the most. It's the fact that we're blurring the lines of reality. We don't know what the difference is between real and fake anymore. So again, when we're talking about AI and what it is and what it isn't, I think we need to remember that it's based on inputs. It's based on human design. It generally will throw out what has been inputted to it before. So anything that it's learning has been a learned behavior from a human. But I think what separates us from the 50s is that it's the volume of learning that these machines are going through. And I think that we're going to get to that a little bit as well when we talk about disrupting industry. Um,
Mm-hmm.
we're talking data sets that never existed until maybe the last 5 or 10 years. Just the ability for multiple people to log on to ChatGPT at once, and it's constantly this machine language is constantly learning from hundreds and thousands of data sets is really what sets this thing apart. So it's based on deception. there's a lot of early cases with artificial intelligence and machines and robotics that are really setting these things up to look like human, to act like humans, to be as close to the human mind as it can be. And maybe this is an important distinction, Joe, because as we talk through this, um, what does it mean to what is intelligence? I think maybe that's something that we need to investigate and talk about right off the bat here is what are we talking about when we say intelligence? Because we're specifically talking about an intelligence that's artificial.
Mhm.
Right off the bat, we're saying it's not real. We think it's it's something that's created. But how do we define that, Joe? What is intelligence?
Sure. So now we're kind of back in my wheelhouse. So thank you for the sort of tech overview, and now we kind of can get into philosophy. I do want to say one thing that I would perhaps, at least at this point, soften the phrasing that it's based on deception insofar as it's based on certainly impersonation or on simulation.
Sure.
But a deception, I would say maybe takes the statement a little too extreme, in the sense just like you go to a magic show and you know that the magician is performing illusions. He's not really sawing that woman in half, right? But it's not deceptive per se because of the fact that you as a receiver are in on the joke. Now we'll put a pin in that because there are cases where deception is involved. But I think in general, we shouldn't necessarily blanket it by calling it based on deception. Back to this question, though, of intelligence per se. There is no one answer to this question, as frustrating as that may be. Now, as Catholics, we, of course, have a preferred sort of answer to this question of what is intelligence. Even there, as Catholics, though, we're going to distinguish because as far as we're aware, there are different modalities or capabilities or types of intelligence among at least two kinds of rational creature and one rational being that is not a creature. So namely, there's God, there are the angels, and then there is man. And all of these things, all of these persons are intelligent, right? The three persons of God, all of the angelic persons, and then all the human persons are intelligent, and they're intelligent in different ways. For our purposes, we're going to speak about human intelligence because it is that which AI is trying to model itself after. However, I want to leave that kind of open-ended part of the question because once you recognize that there are various species of intelligence and that the angel's intelligence, let's say, is not like ours, it is not, for example, mediated through bodies, through the sense impressions. They don't seem to have the same performance of a passive and an active intellect, which I'm about to get into, as human beings do. Rather, they immediately perceive because they are pure spirit. Once you allow for all of those things to have been said, then you have to kind of admit that there's a little bit of open-endedness as to whether or not a machine could gain something that could be called intelligence. It would just be intelligence of a different sort and in a different mode.
Yeah.
So I think what we can say is that let's look at what human intelligence is and then evaluate whether or not, first of all, computers are anything close to it right now and whether or not it's even feasible that they could ever be. Spoiler alert, I don't think they could, but go ahead. You were gonna.
Well, I was gonna say, I think so. When we talk about human intelligence, are we talking Jeopardy, right? Are we talking question and answer?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where a lot of lines have been blurred with AI because the rate of intelligence and how it's measured could be based on the amount of knowledge that a thing has, right?
Right, and this is key, right? So man is the rational animal, the intelligent animal. In this case, rationality and intelligence can basically be used, as it were, interchangeably. And we say the same thing of a baby. We say, in fact, the same thing of a fetus. It is no less of an intelligent creature in this way of speaking. And that's what we really want to distinguish and this is why different communities of interest are going to speak past one another. For example, when the church is coming out and saying, well, it doesn't seem that machines could ever be an intelligence. an intelligence.
Hmm.
That's a different thing from saying that human beings can't, or that machines can't be intelligent and
Intelligent.
scare quant. What we mean
Right.
by intelligent meaning smart, like going on Jeopardy, knowing a lot of facts. But that would be, we don't reduce that. We don't reduce intelligence to that definition. As a matter of fact, we think that would precisely be looking at a human being like a machine. But what intelligence is the ability to rationally engage with the material world, and fundamentally, according to the theory that I would espouse. Now, again, you could different theories of epistemology from Plato to Aristotle, Boethius, Aquinas, Duns Scotus, Kant later. There's all sorts of different theories of epistemology, but Aquinas's I think moderate realism is really, holds up to scrutiny. And basically, what this says is it's the ability to look at a particular thing, a tree, let's say, and the way he describes this is there's two two parts of the intellect, the active and the passive, or the actual and potential intellect. And the active intellect, looking at this tree, sees a tree, but abstracts from it the formal reality that is tree-ness, the quiddity of the thing, and abstracts it into a universal principle, and then bounces that onto the passive intellect. And now the passive intellect can do things. It passes from potency into act in recognizing that, okay, so tree-ness is the quality that trees have. And by the way, this is something that happens. I think we talked about this perhaps before, maybe not on this podcast, but in our own conversation. But this is what you see remarkably early in human beings, remarkably early, and you never see in the highest intelligent creatures otherwise, right? At least corporeal creatures like dolphins and elephants and such. Instead, what you see with them is instinct. You see sensibility and sense impressions. But what's remarkable about human beings is that, somewhere between 18 months and 3 years old, varying, depending on the individual, is this abstraction. When they grasp that this big red rubber thing that daddy is tossing back and forth with the child is called ball, they'll suddenly, by themselves point at something that doesn't look anything like that isn't big and red and rubber, but is small, white and hard, dad's golf ball, and they'll say ball, right? Mm. And that's remarkable. We don't think about how remarkable that is, but that's actually a really remarkable thing that human beings do. Now, once again, though, the actual performance of the thing isn't the point, because there are some human beings, for whatever reason, whether it be a severe handicap or whatever, they're not going to be able to do that. But that's not the point. It's this power. It's this ability to abstract into into classes of things. So, and this also gets to what are the three things that the intelligence or the intellect perform. So we talk about apprehending the world. We talk about reasoning about the world, reasoning, that, if there's one tree and two trees, then that's a plurality of trees. It's not all just one bigger tree, right? When you see two separate trees, even though they both have the same treeness, right? There's that kind of ratiocination that goes on. And then judgment. One thing is better than another. And it's in all these ways that machines are nowhere even in the same universe. They're not even close to being able to do this. All that the models currently are doing is essentially predicting the word that most likely comes next based on human behavior. But there's no evidence of any machine being anything close to the simplest abstraction to be able to, if you asked it a question, which is better, or even which is bigger, 5 or 4, the way in which they're answering that question is not having grasped the actual concept of quantity, right?
Right.
it's rather based on a translation into raw mathematical terms that run on a machine, like a calculator, that simulates an understanding of quantity. But it's not the understanding of quantity. It's not the way that, once again, even a child of 18 months knows big from small, say.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting. It's an interesting point you make, because I think a lot of people looking at AI or pointing their phone at a tree, and the spectacular kind of magic that happens right behind the scenes of that phone being able to identify not only that tree, but how many other trees there are on the planet and where they're situated and when they bloom
Mm-hmm.
and blossom and things like that. So for a human looking to that, and maybe that's why, as you pointed out clearly, deception was probably a little heavy handed on my part, but um, that's where we know that these models aren't anywhere close to a true human intelligence.
Yeah.
However, it's the ability to give information quickly in a way that can be understood clearly by, by us or by a human looking at a phone, that then would call us to say, wow, that phone or that computer is intelligent, because
Mm-hmm.
that was a lot smarter than I was being able to get to the answer more quickly. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and again, maybe we can go down a rabbit hole on that. But I do, in researching this podcast a little bit, I think something that's really interesting that kind of drives this point as well is, back in the 50s when they were talking about artificial intelligence at Dartmouth and all of that. One of the main aims of the research field was, quote, how to make machines use language, form abstractions, and concepts to solve kinds of problems now reserved for humans and improve themselves. And that was back in 1956.
Mm-hmm.
So again, it's this ability to not only have, all of the knowledge at your fingertips, which of course we've talked about this at great length in private conversations, just what the web did, just the internet being able to put all this information at people's fingertips, but in order able to insert this knowledge quickly, to any input that you have, is what's causing some confusion, right, about what is intelligence and how you define intelligence and what makes somebody smart versus a computer smart. So again, I think this is a really important distinction that you're making, is what true intelligence is versus just having the answers, versus just carrying around a dictionary in your pocket, and whether or not AI is any better than just carrying around a dictionary in your pocket. It's just in a lot smaller of a form, and it gets to the answer a lot more quickly.
Right. Yeah. Well, I think there are plenty of analogies that we could make, and I think that part of the problem is, there's a bit of a chicken and the egg question here. Although, if you pressed me upon it, I think I could come up with the answer. What happens first? I think man changes first, and it is precisely what we've been talking about in these last few episodes when we've talked about what the first industrial revolution did to the human being, putting the man in the factory, putting the man as a component in a system of wealth generation rather than this sort of holistic, part of like grasping the whole process and the creative process, right? And then you just fast forward to our day and age, and I was, watching a video on YouTube. I forget what it was, but this person was saying they love to cook and they use meal kits, right? And okay, they love to cook, but they buy these pre-made kits with all pre-made measurements and stuff, and it's kind of like the same way that you would bake a cake out of a box. Now, I'm not, viewers and listeners, I'm not putting that down as such. All
We
that I'm
love
saying
cakes out of
is,
boxes.
yeah, all that I'm saying is we recognize the difference between that and the chef who goes into a kitchen and improvises, a dish and throws it together and just knows by pinch and by touch and by constantly tasting what needs to be adjusted,
Mm-hmm.
how to come up with something compelling in the end. So that seems like a big, diversion, but it's not. What I'm getting at here is that I think an anthropological shift happened before the advent of the computer age. we had already begun to understand man functionally and mechanistically, and therefore it of course wasn't a huge leap. Once you've made that error about man, it's not a big leap to now think that a computer can be like man, because we already got the question wrong about what makes man, right?
Right.
Because it's also at the same time, you got to think, what was Leo dealing with? He was dealing with one of the first things he calls out is scientism. What's he referring to there? He's referring to,
Mm.
you know, a stark kind of Darwinianism. And again, we're not trying to litigate questions of which theories of evolution are admissible or blah, blah, blah. That's not what I'm talking about here. All that I'm saying is that was received in a very simplistic way by a lot of people. Well, we're just an evolved ape. And so all of this is on a spectrum, right? Whereas again, in the classical tradition, the intelligence is an immaterial principle. It is not evolved in man. Now, maybe the wetware, the raw material, the brain that is used in intellection is part of this process of evolution. But at the end of the day, that's just, it still needs the intelligent soul, the intellectual soul, to be the form that really causes this action to take place, or at
Right.
least that's according to the standard theory. So, yeah, we've gone a lot of places with that, but this is the key. If why do we get so confused in arguments, and why do arguments seem to go circular when we're talking about what artificial intelligence means? It's I don't think we know what natural intelligence means.
I think that's a really good point, Joe. I would also mention that reliance on the machine and machinery, and we're going to get to a couple points of some major areas of concern that we have about AI that may be addressed by Pope Leo XIV in the very near future, and by the Catholic Church. But the reliance on the machine, you think back in the Industrial Revolution. I think one of the things that, and we even see it today with mass produced anything, is it's a very cookie cutter thing, right? There's not a lot of variability in it. There's a very strict mode that's being adhered to, and methodology that's being adhered to in the production of anything that's being produced by a machine, because it's pretty much the standard going forward. So even in the Industrial Revolution, we had a lot of people running these machines, but these machines took the creativity a little bit, or even the flexibility of a human being behind it out of the thing. And maybe we can talk about that in a future podcast episode, because I'm going down a little bit of a rabbit hole again. But it's just the dependency on the machine, right,
Mm-hmm.
to produce anything that we used to produce in industry, but have the flexibility to go outside of that box of it being produced. And so, just thinking about IT, I know a lot of people that are using artificial intelligence to produce really mundane things, to forms, to spreadsheets, to lists, and things like that. And I think what they're doing is they're capturing that the reliance on that machine to produce something that is of value is an afterthought, right? It's just producing something, and they're taking that and they're using that as the model worth for the thing that was being produced. So we just kind of transitioning into these major areas of concern, and we can talk about the socioeconomic ideas and the material ideas. Is what does that mean for industry when you've now maybe possibly taken some creative elements out of an industry, and it's being processed now by artificial intelligence, and what does that mean for us today, and how similar is that maybe to the Industrial Revolution and what we were seeing in the 1800s?
Well, in a lot of ways, it is similar to what happened with the first major upheaval that we would talk about as the Industrial Revolution. I would also, though, point out that this is not the first kind of epical change that has happened since Rerum novarum. Arguably, at least 3 other times since Rerum novarum, similar gigantic paradigm shifts have taken place. At least 3 other times. Probably, actually, 4. Okay, so strap in real quick. We'll just go through them. Post the interbellum period, post World War I, to World War II. Here, a gigantic shift takes place in belief in the Western world, in the way religion is resonates in society. So if Leo was worried about godlessness and a drift away from religion, oh boy, after World War One and the devastation and the horror of modern war that World War One ushers in, huge, the scarring of that upon the generation, even more so than World War II, is just this gigantic paradigm shift in the Western world. And at the same time, you have centralized and international banking coming online at the time, which represents a gigantic economic shift. So by the time you get to Quadragesimo Anno in 1931, on the 40th anniversary of Rerum Novarum, you've gone through one of these gigantic major shifts. And already now, with stock market crashes having happened and things like that, there's kind of now a new state of affairs that's even unimaginable from Leo's point of view looking forward. Then you have after World War II, and you have the globalization, right? And now you have the world formed into two blocks of power after Yalta, right? And you have basically, the new globalist economy is now just we can speak of the third world or the global south, and developing nations. They weren't even called developing nations because they didn't even seem to be developing. It was just the third world back then, right? And so this is one of the concerns that John the 23rd and Paul VI are going to be concerned about. And this, in their minds, and I think rightly so, represents kind of a new paradigm. And what happens again in between that makes it theologically more complex? Well, the pill, basically. Right? Now contraception and family planning are mainstreamed. And so this is a huge paradigm shift as well. So they're dealing with that. Then you get John Paul II seeing the fall of the Iron Curtain. And obviously when the Iron Curtain falls, there's another big paradigm shift. And I won't belabor the point with these. And then finally, arguably, the advent of the internet in general and just the information age.
Right.
And so we're overdue. Because here's the thing: each of those popes that I mentioned, Pius the 11th, John the 23rd, and Paul the 6th, John Paul the 2nd, they all really, really responded to the moment. And for whatever reason, from Benedict and Francis, while we did have social encyclicals, while we did have things coming out, they were primarily talking about the environment and things, but I think that the information economy, this whole idea of what computers have done to our lives, they didn't really address that per se. And I think that we're way overdue for recognizing that, wait, this is another big paradigm shift along the order, probably more than the order of magnitude that those things were. So now here we find ourselves today. And so I think we could go through really quickly, just sort of where I think if you were to take the approach similar to Leo the 13th in Rerum Novarum, and if I were writing, I put together an outline that Lee and I are sharing here. Basically, this is what I think a new Rerum Novarum for this day and age would maybe draw our attention towards.
Yeah, and please note, listeners out there, that this was not generated by ChatGPT.
That's right.
Okay, just to put a disclaimer.
I didn't even have help. Yeah, not even. I didn't consult it.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's walk through these. I guess we can start at the top here. So material and socioeconomic. So these are some areas of concern about AI. So just distributive justice, I think, is what we're talking about there. And maybe in the idea of kind of true ownership. So explain that a little bit. What are we talking about with material and socioeconomic concern?
Yeah, well, so I really think kind of all of these, and then maybe next episode we'll talk about the other broad level issues that are anthropological and philosophical and moral, but all of these fall under the material and socioeconomic. And the first one is a concern about distributive justice. Put simply, now, this isn't the fault of AI, right? So this is what its defenders will immediately say. It's like, well, you're not describing anything different than is basically true of the whole commodities market in general or whatever. Yeah, okay, fair enough. But you know, the thousandth wrong in a series of wrongs is still just as wrong as wrong number one. And so that doesn't seem to me to deflate the argument. So in the same way that developing nations and those in poorer countries, those in places in the world that are exploited for cheap labor, do not have a share in the fruits of the extant prevailing economy. It would appear that AI is going the same route, that AI generation is following the same patterns. Furthermore, because of the nature of the space and the competition in the space, for all of the talk about democratization and things like that, I mean, it's not for nothing that OpenAI, which was founded originally pretending to be a nonprofit, very quickly kind of jettisoned that identity, became a gigantic venture capital sponge
Yeah.
that soaked up billions of dollars of venture capital, very much a for-profit concern, and immediately allied itself in formal partnership with Microsoft, which probably is already a monopoly, and now it's just through this it already has this, now it has this leg into another industry. So the same concerns that, yes, have been, things that you could level at the prevailing economy for decades. Well, they're just, history's repeating itself with the
Yeah.
generation of this new technology.
Yeah. So, and if I can, so maybe spinning that a different way, it's, I know a lot of people are using AI, OpenAI, ChatGPT, and we'll get to this in the next couple of bullets that you've written down here. Is they're not, I don't think they're really aware of where it came from, and who's running it,
Yeah.
and the people that are running it behind the scenes, and that is something to be very aware of. That this is a very for-profit thing.
Mm-hmm.
These people are interested in users and user base, and I didn't talk about this in the introduction to AI and some of the the exploiting of information, but that's really what they're after, is getting the most users they can to get the most information into the machine that they can to produce more information that it can then digest and then put out as a variable and make it quote unquote more and more intelligent, right?
Right.
And so again, it's worth saying this is being run by some very very high level, very rich organizations and people.
Yeah,
And
and the
I don't know
people.
if they necessarily have the best interest of you know the people in mind, and that's something to think about as well.
Yeah, and all of us that are using ChatGPT, anybody who's out here, just playing with ChatGPT or getting ChatGPT to help write an outline or a little bit of Python code or whatever it happens to be,
Mm-hmm.
you're not the major consumer. Actually, most of you probably aren't even paying for the service, using it for free. And as we've learned through the social network age,
Yep.
when you're not paying for something, that means you are the commodity. It's
Yeah.
your data that is making other people money. And so the major purchasers of GPT technology is going to be through its API. They're going to be advertisers and things like this. They're already talking about plans for how they can now probably target every individual person on the planet with very personalized, individualized ads. For example, videos that pop up and speak to you from your phone by name and say, I think you would really like this, and this is a friend. Now, by the way, anytime we talk about a lot of this stuff, I'm going to keep appealing to your grandmother. Forgive me, but think of grandma. Think of grandma picking up a FaceTime call, and here's this person looking her in the eye who looks absolutely real, calling her by name, telling her that she needs to send a check so that her insurance policy doesn't cancel or whatever it happens to be. Okay.
Yeah.
Or giving her an offer that she just can't refuse, and that appeals and pushes all the buttons that the technology now knows are grandma's buttons as a
Yeah.
consumer. When we talk about moving away from the ownership economy, this is what I have in mind. I mean that, just like when we were wrapping up our conversation about Rerum novarum, and I talked about how do you do distributism, or how would you, at the bare minimum, try in whatever way you can to make yourself less of this consumer modality. Don't be the mere consumer in an economy. That's why I say that this is driving us further and further away from this. This is making us consumers par excellence in multiple ways. We're consumers of the technology. We're not participating in creating it. Even if we generate things with it, ultimately we're we're also, anything you generate with it, you're also feeding it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
don't think that you've created something using this technology that's yours.
Right.
It belongs to the machine first.
Right. I think on that point too, just a quick note on, the a very predominant Apple designer that's just recently said that he's going to be working with OpenAI to create devices that we can carry with us everywhere that are just going to be open, kind of these autonomous chat GPT engines that can answer every question that we have wherever we are. And I think that's another danger. You're mentioning grandma, and I'm also mentioning, a lot of us that are just attracted to the flashy technology things.
Yep.
And once they become more and more appealing, it becomes more and more dangerous. And I should note too, this happens, Joe, with you and I very frequently. We talk about AI, and it just seems to get darker and darker every time we have these conversations. And that's not on purpose. I'm sure there's a lot of good that we can maybe talk about in a very short follow-up podcast on this. But again, moving to the areas of concern that we think a new Rerum novarum would be addressing, is this exploitation of
Yeah.
maybe not only humans, but exploitation of resources. I think
Yeah.
it's very rare that you talk to someone that is aware of the amount of money and space and resources that go into creating these supercomputers that are running artificial intelligence behind the scenes. And it's can be very destructive. So maybe talk about that a little bit, Joe.
Yeah, and I'll try to be briefer about this one, but essentially, in two ways, I think the generation economy of this technology is engaged in some of the worst exploitative practices of late capitalism, and that would be in terms of labor usage and natural resource usage. In terms of labor, this is because the large language models, all the most successful ones, are trained with protocol known as reinforced learning with human feedback or from human feedback, and that means that in order to get all the bad stuff out of the models, so that when you're trying to write a charming story about a family of bunnies, the bunnies don't get die in a nuclear holocaust all of a sudden, but because that's what the machine generates. There are human beings reading outputs and also reading the worst, like basically going through the data sets that before they're fed into the machine and needing to discover all of the terrible things. And I'll just leave it at that. I don't want to even get euphemistic about it, but you can imagine, what kind of filth is out on the internet. That's what we're paying human beings, something like 4 cents an hour in some places, to basically go through all day long, and it's leading to anxiety disorders, suicidal ideation. All of these things have been reported in the literature about the workers in developing nations like Ghana, like Ecuador, etc., who are being used for these purposes.
Yeah.
In terms of the resource consumption, just it takes a lot of fresh water because you have to keep you can't allow calcification in the machines and things like that. So you take fresh water, they're cleaning it up out of water reservoirs, and then they're running that through these machines. And in a lot of cases, you basically have potable water generating plants that are put in by these companies to cool off machines.
Yeah.
Where the neighborhood of people that actually live there, the natives who have lived there for generations, are net importers of bottled water because they don't have potable freshwater sources to drink from. So just imagine the disparity involved in that. And then just like the heat and noise pollution that comes off these plants has also been something that gets noted, that basically where some of these plants have been built by companies from the United States going down and building in the global south, the neighborhood basically ends up, everybody has to move out. It becomes a ghost town because of the noise that is going on 24 hours a day with the whirring of these. Imagine, like if your computer fan gets a little loud at a time, now just take that and multiply it by several thousand and imagine what that would sound like. That's basically what you're dealing with if you live within blocks of one of these data centers.
Yeah, the level of cooling, the level of space associated with these neural network supercomputers that are being built is quite fascinating.
Yeah.
We can move on from this, but I think it's worth researching if anyone has the time listening to this, just to look up what Microsoft and some other large companies are doing, especially down in the Southwest with some of these supercomputer network areas.
Mhm.
Okay, what about intellectual property? I think we've talked about that a little bit as well. You know, we're feeding the machine. You know, maybe we're
Mhm.
feeding it either art or written language or poetry or something like that. And you know, what are the ramifications of kind of serving up all of this information on a large scale? And what happens to intellectual property?
Yeah, I mean, so this is something that I don't want to speak too definitively on, because I think, you have to give a little bit of deference to the process of, judicial review, and there are lawsuits underway in from all kinds of quarters. You did see certain labor sectors like SAG-AFTRA, striking the screenwriters and actors guilds. Because they're concerned about their creative jobs getting sucked up by this. There's concern. The New York Times, sued OpenAI for plagiarism, basically by using all of their articles, journalistic articles, without citation and without referencing and things like that. So this is a concern. This is a concern that will remain, and it's just something that I think, need to be a little bit on guard for, and think about, and especially think about the people who, with the best of intentions, kind of the most noble in our society, not laying claim to something, shared, for example, open source software coding or software projects via GitHub or OpenStack and things like that, so that they could give a leg up to other developing coders, young people who were trying to get into things. They shared all these free resources out of like charity, basically. And
Yeah,
now all of that resource has been stolen and is being used for profit by by this kind of machine, basically.
yeah.
So it's just yet another sort of unjust situation in the system that at least needs to be addressed if we're going to sit easily with the way this technology is going.
Yeah, and I think this next bullet here that we're going to talk about is probably the most similar to the Industrial Revolution and what's taken place in our day and age. Joe, is growing up with computers and the advent of the internet. It was if you wanted a good job, if you wanted a good paying job, you were going to learn how to code. Right. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that was the thing. You were going to get into technology. That's where the money was. That's where a lot of the businesses were going. And now, I mean, almost overnight, those industries are facing mass layoffs. They're facing jobs that are no longer necessary, that can be done in a fraction of the time, through an automated process through AI, and like you said, through borrowed code that's been shared and maybe exploited. So job loss and displacement, that's a very, very big reality for us even today.
It is. It is. And this is, again, probably at every level of the economy. And here's the thing, the people driving this boat, the people working towards these advancements, have not set the limit. They want to go as far as they can go with this. They want, so there's already the work to take completely autonomous AI and put it into and make it a function of self-driving vehicles. So we're not even just talking about tech jobs. We're not just talking about graphic design jobs.
Great
We're not
point.
just talking about things like that. We're talking about actual drivers and if you think about the truckers that like make the rest of the goods economy run in America, we're talking about them
Yeah.
being potentially pushed out. So once again, just an area of concern. And if this sounds like a Jeremiah ad, viewers, listeners, here's what I just want to say. It's like, we've been so conditioned. We've been so conditioned in the modern age to simply kind of deal with things happening. And we'll probably talk about that a little more in depth in a future episode when we get to the philosophical concerns or errors entailed here. But I want to preempt a little bit of that objection because we're not going to get to it in this episode, simply by saying this is a valid question. It's a valid question to say to someone, you know, your proposal, while it may do a lot of good, it doesn't mitigate harm enough, and therefore we need to slow it down. We need to put it on pause. We need a moratorium on this. And actually, time was when it wasn't even like just a majority tipping point. It wasn't just past 50%. Something's 51% good, 49% bad. We're going to go with it. Time was when, you know, you basically had to work all these things out before a proposal that is as significant in changing society as this would ever be put forward, would ever be allowed to go forward. There was sort of a protection of custom and a protection.
Talking a little regulation, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You know, so that kind of protectionism of custom and protecting against what we don't know about future impacts, it is a valid critique. And I just want to, you know, I want to emphasize that because I think a lot of people think that this is out of order, that this is like, well, you can't, you know, I mean, technology is moral, you know, morally neutral. It's not. Almost no technology in its real context of development and implementation is morally neutral.
Yeah.
In and of itself, yeah, it is. It is morally neutral. It's anything is only morally good or bad in the way that it is used per se, because it's actions that are moral or otherwise, not things. But the point is, within context, you're talking about societies, you're talking about human action. And so we need to ask these questions. And unfortunately, the horse is out of the barn. I don't know whether the barn door is closed. The cynical side of me says the barn door was closed and the barn was burned down. But maybe we can put the brakes on and slow this down a little bit, even though the proper time to have had this conversation was, alas, 10, 20 years ago.
Yeah. You know, I think as well, maybe in the last few minutes that we have, we can certainly go through some of the darker unintended consequences that AI could bring about. But let's maybe we can pivot a little bit and let's put a Chestertonian spin on it. How would Chesterton respond? And what would be the appropriate response? You know, we've walked through Rerum novarum. We've walked through a fantastic encyclical that's been around for quite a while. We've talked about some great upheavals in society, including our modern day upheaval of the information age that we're facing today. So, what Joe, do you think would be the appropriate Chestertonian response?
Yeah. Well, I think that there is actually an essay that Chesterton wrote called Morality and the Machine, I believe it was. It was a 3-part essay. It eventually became a chapter in The Outline of Sanity. I think it's chapter 6 or thereabouts in The Outline of Sanity. Otherwise, it was in, you can find it on the Chesterton Digital Library. It was 3 weeks in a row essays in the Daily News or maybe GK's Weekly from around 1924, I think. Anyway, so Chesterton did address particularly this, and he basically makes the point that the test of a machine, the question you ask of a machine is, does this make man's life better? And that's a perfectly reasonable question. And to really ask it in a totality and really to consider that question from all sides. And he addresses in there sort of the false notion that, well, you can't turn back the clock. You can't stop the machines. The machines are going to, and he says, absolutely we can. We don't have to go full Luddite and smash the machines, but we can opt out of the machine. We can choose not to use the machine. So that's point number 1. Point number 2, from a Chestertonian perspective, is that man is at the center of all these questions. Whenever he speaks about economy, whenever he speaks about sociopolitical arrangements, the human person with infinite dignity and worth, especially in the context of a natural society, which is the family, is at the center of his concern and his consideration. And he says that has to be what we do. And in What's Wrong with the World, he refers to what he calls the medical mistake, and how we make this giant error in not shaping society to fit the average human soul, but rather we warp the human soul to fit this society that evolves around it, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. He says, if a house is so built so as to knock a man's head off every time he enters the door, the house is built wrong. And so we have to make sure that this home, this common home in which we live, which is not just the material, the material world that we live in, but the social space and economy and government that we've structured around us, is really conducive to the flourishing of the human person.
Yeah. That's a great answer. And I think it's a really good reminder to look back at, like we even did in the last podcast, the compendium of Catholic social doctrine, where it talks about, just an outline of Catholic social teaching, that we can't lose the fundamental values of social life, which includes these principal values of truth, freedom, and justice, and all pointing to the roads to salvation. And I think the way you put it was perfectly. Is the machine worth using? Does it add quality to life? Not only quality to life of making things easier and more efficient, but how is it helping your neighbor? How is it helping you live the Christian life? How is it helping you proclaim the gospel? I think these are all questions that are worth diving into, and maybe in the next episode here, as we look into some of the other anthropological and philosophical questions related to AI, we can start answering those a little more conclusively.
Looking forward to it. Yeah.
Great. Excellent. Well, thank you so much again, Joe, for your time and for helping us put this together and digest some of this information on maybe a future Rerum Novarum that we'll see from Pope Leo XIV. So keep Pope Leo XIV in your prayers. Certainly keep us in your prayers, and make sure that you're subscribing to this podcast so that we can keep tabs on what's happening. So thanks again, Joe, for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.